Get your ghetto ass and that piece of shit car off my street before I have you arrested for trespassing. That's what Bethany Whitmore shrieked at me while pointing at my Honda Civic, parked in my own damn driveway. The reek of her cheap wine breath mixed with expensive perfume as she waved her phone mid-call with 911. Yes, officer, there's a suspicious Mexican man casing houses. He looks like a drug dealer. I'm Marcus Rivera, and for 8 years I've watched people lie, cheat, and manipulate their way through my courtroom. But sitting there with my house keys still warm in my palm, watching this woman's Botoxed face twist with pure hatred as 2 patrol cars screamed down our quiet suburban street, I felt something rare. The calm before a storm. See, Bethany thought she was dealing with just another minority she could intimidate out of her neighborhood. The porch lights cast dramatic shadows as she stood there, arms crossed, absolutely convinced she was about to watch me get dragged away in handcuffs. What she didn't know was that in 3 weeks, she'd be standing in my courtroom and I'd be the one wearing the black robes. What would you do if someone called the cops on you for parking in your own driveway? And where are you watching from? Let me know if your neighborhood has a Bethany too. 6 months earlier, I thought buying a house in Maplewood Estates was going to be the fresh start my family needed. After a brutal divorce that left me with custody of my 16-year-old daughter Sophia and about half the assets I'd worked 20 years to build, this modest colonial seemed perfect. The smell of fresh paint and new beginnings filled the air as we toured the empty rooms. "Dad, look, there's actually kids my age here," Sophia squealed, pointing through the window at teenagers shooting hoops. The sound of bouncing basketballs echoed off the pristine driveways, mixing with the distant hum of lawnmowers maintaining those perfect suburban lawns. But across the street, Bethany Whitmore was already sharpening her claws. Within 48 hours of moving in, I found my first gift from the Neighborhood Welcoming Committee, a yellow HOA violation notice tucked under my windshield wiper. Apparently, my Honda Civic qualified as a commercial vehicle because it had, get this, slightly tinted windows. The fine texture of the citation paper felt rough between my fingers as I read the ridiculous complaint. I learned later that Bethany had been the unofficial queen bee of Maplewood Estates for 7 years. Real estate agent, HOA board secretary, and admin of the neighborhood Facebook group with over 300 members. Her McMansion dominated the street corner, all fake columns and gaudy fountain that never seemed to work properly, constantly gurgling like an old man clearing his throat. Bethany had a system, and it was brutally effective. The Johnsons, a young black couple, lasted 14 months before the constant harassment broke them. The Garcias made it 11 months before giving up. Frank Castellano, a retired police detective who lived 4 houses down, had been quietly documenting her pattern for years. "She picks families that don't look like her ideal neighbors," Frank told me over coffee, his voice low and careful. The bitter taste of his overbrewed coffee matched the bitter truth he was sharing. Then she makes their lives hell until they move. That first night when she called the cops on me, watching her smug face through my rearview mirror as officers approached my car, I felt something click into place. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every family she'd driven away. So I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of running, I was going to fight back. The morning after the police incident, I woke up to find Sophia staring out her bedroom window, her face twisted with confusion. "Dad, why is that lady installing security cameras pointed at our house?" Sure enough, there was Bethany, directing 2 men as they mounted cameras on her porch, all angled directly at my driveway and front door. The mechanical whir of power drills cut through the morning air like nails on a chalkboard, a sound that would become the soundtrack to our escalating war. By 10 a.m., she'd escalated to Phase 2. A city code enforcement officer knocked on my door, clipboard in hand, apologetic smile plastered on his face. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Rivera, but we received a complaint about your lawn violating City Ordinance 15.3a, grass height exceeding 4 inches. I looked at my perfectly normal 3-inch lawn, morning dew still sparkling on the blades like tiny diamonds mocking this absurdity. You know what they say about assuming it makes an ass out of you and me, but in Bethany's case, it was just going to make an ass out of her. Who filed the complaint?" "Anonymous tip," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Look, this seems frivolous, but I have to document it." Strike 2 came when Sophia trudged home from school, her backpack dragging behind her like dead weight, her usual brightness replaced by something that made my chest tighten. "Emma Whitmore told everyone we're probably drug dealers because we drive a Honda," she said, slumping into the kitchen chair. The sharp scent of her strawberry lip gloss mixed with disappointment as she fought back tears. "She said her mom's gonna make sure we move somewhere more appropriate for people like us." The sound of my coffee mug hitting granite echoed through the kitchen. Time for my counterpunch. Years of handling property disputes in my courtroom had taught me something most homeowners never learn. Property surveys are public record at the county courthouse. I'd seen countless cases where neighbors assumed fence lines were property lines, only to discover encroachments that turned nuisance complaints into six-figure lawsuits. The lesson? Never trust what you see. Always verify what you own. For $150, I ordered surveys for every property on our block. 3 days later, the results arrived, and I actually laughed out loud. Bethany's precious white picket fence, the one framing her prize-winning roses, was sitting 18 inches deep on my property. But here's where my judicial training kicked in. Instead of confronting her immediately, I made 3 calculated moves that would haunt her for months. First, I filed a formal complaint with the State Real Estate Board about her discriminatory Facebook comments, a career-ending ethics violation. Second, I submitted a FOIA request for all neighborhood code enforcement complaints, specifically requesting IP addresses of anonymous tips. Third, I called my civil rights attorney buddy. "Marcus," he said, "this is textbook section 1983 discrimination. Keep building that paper trail." That's when Frank Castellano knocked on my door with intelligence that changed everything. "She doesn't know you're a judge," he whispered, evening barbecue smoke drifting between us. "She thinks you're unemployed because your car's always home during court hours." Perfect. While Bethany played neighborhood detective, I was building a federal case against someone who had no idea I decided the fate of people exactly like her every single day. Let the games begin. Week 2 of the Bethany Whitmore experience began with her calling an emergency HOA meeting. The community center smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams as I walked into a room buzzing with manufactured outrage. "We need to discuss the declining standards in our neighborhood," Bethany announced, her voice carrying that particular pitch of self-righteous authority that made my molars ache. She'd positioned herself behind the folding table like Napoleon at Waterloo, flanked by her loyal minions. Gladys Pemberton, who collected ceramic cats and grievances in equal measure, and Richard Stanton, whose life peaked when he got a stop sign installed in 1987. "Exhibit A," Bethany continued, clicking through photos. "Unauthorized parking of commercial vehicles." Up popped my Honda Civic, because apparently slightly tinted windows now qualified a sedan as a fleet vehicle. I half expected her to claim my toaster was commercial kitchen equipment next. I sat in the back row, recording everything. Our state's single-party consent laws meant I could legally capture every word of this Oscar-worthy performance. After years on the bench, I'd learned that people like Bethany always provide enough rope to hang themselves. You just have to be patient enough to let them tie the knot. "Furthermore," she said, her manicured nails clicking against the table like tiny hammers, "we've had reports of suspicious activity and loud music at inappropriate hours." Frank Castellano stood up, bless his retired cop soul. "What specific times, Bethany? And what constitutes loud music, my hearing aid or actual noise violations?" The beautiful sound of silence filled the room. Bethany's Botoxed forehead attempted to furrow as she realized she'd fabricated evidence a little too loosely. "The point is," she recovered, "we need new parking restrictions, lawn maintenance requirements, and noise ordinances, effective immediately." That's when Janet Morrison, a lawyer from 2 streets over, delivered the legal smackdown. You can't vote on bylaws without 48-hour written notice to all residents. It's state law governing HOA operations. I'd spent the previous evening studying those exact regulations. Emergency sessions required genuine emergencies, fires, floods, or financial crises, not automotive racism. The lesson every homeowner should learn: HOA boards must follow their own rules, or their decisions are legally void. The vote failed spectacularly. 7 opposed, 3 in favor, and enough awkward silence to fill a morgue. But Bethany's desperation was showing. That weekend, while I took Sophia to soccer practice, she struck with the nuclear option. I returned home to find a bright orange notice taped to my door. "Vehicle abandoned, tow authorization pending." My car, in my driveway, for 3 hours. The tow truck driver was already hooking up chains when I screeched back home, the metallic scraping against my bumper making my teeth ache. "A lady across the street said this car's been abandoned for days," Pete the driver explained, looking confused as I waved my registration papers. Here's where Bethany's pattern revealed itself. Pete casually mentioned this was his 3rd bogus call from our street this month, all targeting minority families, all from the same phone number. While Pete unhooked my car, I made 3 calls that would haunt Bethany for months. First to the city's towing complaint hotline, then to Pete's company requesting all tow records from our street, and finally to my civil rights attorney. "Marcus," he said after I explained the pattern, "fraudulent tow requests targeting minorities? That's federal territory now." Watching Bethany's silhouette rigid with frustration in her window, I smiled. She'd just graduated from neighborhood nuisance to federal defendant. Game, set, match. By week 3, Bethany had apparently decided that subtlety was for amateurs. I woke up Tuesday morning to the sound of car doors slamming and found 2 police cruisers in my driveway. Inside, Sophia sat at the kitchen table crying, her school backpack abandoned like evidence at a crime scene. "They searched my backpack at school," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "In front of everyone. Mrs. Henderson said someone called saying I was dealing drugs." The salty taste of her tears mixed with my own fury as she buried her face against my shoulder. Detective Sarah Chen looked as disgusted as I felt. "Mr. Rivera, this anonymous tip came from the same number that's been calling in reports about your address. We're documenting a clear harassment pattern here." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Pete, the tow truck driver. "Judge Rivera, that crazy lady tried getting me to tow your car again. Said you don't really live there. Thought you should know she's losing it. The beautiful irony?" Pete knew I was a judge, but Bethany still didn't. Her harassment campaign was about to meet someone who'd spent 8 years dismantling cases exactly like hers. That afternoon brought peak absurdity. Derek Whitmore appeared at my door carrying a manila envelope and looking like a man who'd clearly been given marching orders he didn't understand. His cologne was strong enough to kill houseplants, and his nervous energy practically vibrated off him. "Are you Marcus Rivera? I need to serve you with harassment papers and a restraining order petition." I nearly choked on my coffee. After 3 weeks of documented harassment from his wife, Bethany was claiming I was the problem. The courthouse envelope felt familiar in my hands. I'd processed hundreds of these over the years. You want to know the kicker? She was filing in my own municipal court system. "Derek," I said, deciding to have some fun, "you might want to ask your wife what evidence she's collected, because my security cameras have been very busy too." His confused puppy dog expression told me everything. Poor Derek had no clue his wife had been waging psychological warfare while he traveled for work. He was just a delivery boy, completely oblivious that he'd just served legal papers to the judge who would likely hear his wife's case. But here's where things got interesting. That evening, Frank knocked on my door with intelligence that made my prosecutor instincts sing opera. "Marcus, your neighbor's in deeper trouble than we thought," he said, settling into my kitchen chair. The rich aroma of Colombian coffee mixed with the sweet smell of impending justice as I poured us both a cup. "House is in pre-foreclosure, real estate license suspended for ethics violations. And here's the beautiful part. The HOA treasury is missing $23,000. My judicial experience kicked into high gear. I'd seen this exact pattern dozens of times. Financially desperate defendant, systematic targeting of minorities, access to community funds, escalating fraudulent complaints. The lesson every homeowner needs burned into their brain. People with access to other people's money and nothing left to lose become incredibly dangerous incredibly quickly. "Gets better," Frank continued, his retired cop instincts clearly enjoying this. "I contacted the Garcias and Johnsons, the families who moved away. Identical harassment pattern, mysterious break-ins, then surprise. Bethany's company had buyers lined up immediately. The pieces assembled themselves like a perfectly crafted legal brief. This wasn't neighborhood racism. This was systematic housing discrimination with profit motive. A harassment-to-sale scheme that had been running for years. I speed-dialed my civil rights attorney. "Tom, remember that discrimination case we discussed? It just became a RICO prosecution." Watching Bethany's house from my window, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes when justice finally catches up to someone who thought they were untouchable. She'd spent 3 weeks building a federal case against herself, one documented crime at a time, under the nose of someone who specialized in sending people exactly like her to prison. Her fatal flaw, never bothering to Google her target. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source, Bethany's own daughter. Emma Whitmore showed up at my door Friday evening, her usual teenage arrogance replaced by something that looked suspiciously like guilt. The porch light cast harsh shadows across her face as she shifted nervously from foot to foot, clutching a manila folder against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Rivera, I need to tell you something about my mom." Sophia appeared behind me, curiosity overriding weeks of accumulated resentment. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "I heard what happened at school." "The drug thing." Emma's voice cracked slightly. That wasn't supposed to happen. Mom said she was just going to file some complaints to get you to move. She never said anything about getting Sophia in trouble. I invited her in, noting how her hands trembled as she set the folder on my kitchen table. The sweet scent of her vanilla perfume couldn't mask the fear radiating off her in waves. My dad doesn't know any of this, she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. He thinks Mom's just been stressed about work, but I've been watching and I copied some stuff because what she's doing is really messed up. Emma opened the folder, revealing a treasure trove of documents that made my legal instincts practically purr with satisfaction. Bank statements showing mortgage payments 3 months behind, foreclosure notices hidden from Derek, real estate commission records showing a suspicious pattern of sales. She's been taking money from the HOA account, Emma whispered, as if saying it quietly would make it less of a felony. $23,000 over 2 years. She thinks Dad will divorce her if he finds out how bad things are. But the real bombshell was a printed email thread between Bethany and her business partner, discussing their neighborhood improvement strategy. The casual racism was breathtaking. Target the minorities first, they're less likely to fight back, and Derek travels enough that we can escalate without him interfering. Frank had been right about the pattern, but he'd underestimated the scope. This wasn't just harassment. It was a systematic scheme to artificially inflate property values by driving out undesirable families and flipping their houses to carefully selected buyers. "There's more," Emma said, her voice barely audible. "She's been planning to plant drugs in your car. She bought them from some guy her business partner knows. It's supposed to happen this weekend while Dad's out of town." The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth. In my courtroom, I'd seen desperate defendants make increasingly dangerous moves when cornered, but this crossed into serious felony territory. "Emma, why are you telling me this?" She looked at Sophia, then back at me, tears finally spilling over. "Because I heard Mom on the phone yesterday. She was asking someone how to make it look like an accident if other methods didn't work. I think she's talking about hurting you." The power dynamic had just shifted completely. Bethany wasn't just a racist neighbor anymore. She was a financially desperate criminal willing to escalate to violence to protect her scheme. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd raised a daughter with a conscience. "Emma," I said carefully, "I need you to know that everything you've told me tonight might end up as evidence in a court case. Are you prepared for that?" She nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "My mom needs help, real help, and Sophia doesn't deserve what she's been going through." As Emma left that night, I realized the game had fundamentally changed. I wasn't just defending my family anymore. I was potentially saving lives. And thanks to a 16-year-old's moral courage, I now had everything I needed to stop Bethany before she crossed the line from harassment into something far more dangerous. Time to call in the federal cavalry. Saturday morning, my kitchen transformed into a war room that would make any prosecutor jealous. Frank arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, carrying a box of police files and the grim satisfaction of a detective who'd finally connected all the dots. Sophia sat at the breakfast bar, her laptop open to social media reconnaissance that would impress the FBI. "All right, team," I said, spreading Emma's documents across my granite countertop like battle plans. "We've got 48 hours before Bethany tries to plant evidence and about 2 weeks before her foreclosure becomes public. She's desperate, dangerous, and about to make the biggest mistake of her life." Frank pulled out a legal pad covered in his precise handwriting. "I've contacted 3 families from other neighborhoods who experienced identical harassment patterns. Same MO, systematic complaints, false police reports, mysterious property damage, then surprise buyers appear through Bethany's real estate network." The scope was staggering. Over 4 years, Bethany had orchestrated the forced sale of 11 properties, generating over $400,000 in commissions, while systematically driving minority families from 3 different neighborhoods. "Here's what we're dealing with," I continued, channeling my courtroom voice. "Federal civil rights violations under Section 1983, conspiracy to commit housing discrimination, mail fraud for the fake HOA violations, wire fraud for the electronic complaints, and now attempted evidence tampering." Sophia looked up from her laptop, her teenage tech skills proving invaluable. "Dad, I found Bethany's Venmo transactions. She's been paying the same 3 people for property maintenance services every month, but none of them are licensed contractors. Bingo. The muscle behind her intimidation campaign, all documented with digital receipts." Frank leaned back in his chair, the morning sunlight catching the silver in his hair. "I've got Detective Chen from the drug tip investigation willing to coordinate with federal agents. She's as pissed as we are about what happened to Sophia." But we needed more than evidence. We needed strategy. From my years on the bench, I'd learned that timing in legal warfare is everything. Move too early and your target disappears. Move too late and innocent people get hurt. Here's the plan, I said, feeling the familiar rush of building a case that would stick. Phase 1, Sophia continues monitoring social media while Emma feeds us intelligence from inside the house. Phase 2, Frank coordinates with federal investigators to set up surveillance for the evidence-planting attempt. Phase 3, we let Bethany walk into the trap she's building for herself. The beautiful thing about desperate criminals is their predictability. Bethany would escalate exactly as we expected because she had no other choice. Her house of cards was collapsing, and she'd grab at any straw to stop the fall. Frank pulled out his phone. I've got a buddy at the DEA who specializes in evidence tampering cases. If Bethany tries to plant drugs in your car, she'll be committing a federal felony on camera. What about Emma? Sophia asked, genuine concern in her voice. She's risking everything to help us. Emma's a minor providing evidence about crimes against other minors, I explained. She'll have full witness protection, and if this goes to trial, her testimony could put her mother away for 20 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Bethany's own daughter was about to become the star witness in her federal prosecution. We spent the next 3 hours coordinating with agencies I'd worked with for years. FBI Civil Rights Division, DEA for the evidence tampering, IRS for the HOA embezzlement, and state authorities for the real estate fraud. By noon, we had a task force that would make any defense attorney weep, but the most satisfying call was to my civil rights attorney. Tom, remember when you said this could be a career-making case? Well, it just became the case that ends careers. As our impromptu task force dispersed to set the trap, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from turning the tables on someone who thought they held all the cards. Bethany had spent months hunting what she thought was defenseless prey. She was about to discover she'd been stalking a predator who was very, very good at his job. The smell of justice brewing was better than any coffee I'd ever tasted. Sunday night arrived with the kind of tension that makes your skin crawl. I'd positioned myself at my bedroom window, watching Bethany's house through night vision binoculars Frank had borrowed from his police contacts. At 2:17 a.m., her garage door opened silently and a figure in dark clothing slipped out carrying what looked like a small package. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched Bethany creep across the street toward my driveway. The motion-activated security cameras I'd installed were recording everything in crisp 4K detail, but seeing her in real time felt surreal. This woman was actually going through with it. She spent 12 minutes trying to plant what I assumed were drugs, somewhere in my Honda Civic, her movements jerky with paranoia. Every few seconds, she'd freeze and scan the neighborhood like a nervous animal. The irony was delicious. She had no idea that 3 different law enforcement agencies were watching her through telephoto lenses from unmarked vehicles positioned around the block. But Bethany's late-night crime spree was just the opening act. Monday morning brought escalation that even I hadn't anticipated. Sophia came downstairs for breakfast, her face pale and shaken, clutching her phone like a lifeline. Dad, Emma just texted me. Her mom called Child Protective Services and told them you've been touching me inappropriately. The words hit me like a physical blow. The bitter taste of absolute rage flooded my mouth as I realized Bethany had just crossed into territory that no parent should ever have to navigate. False allegations of child abuse weren't just criminal. They were designed to destroy lives even when proven untrue. She's trying to get you arrested before the evidence planning gets discovered, Sophia continued, her voice steadier than mine would have been. Emma heard her on the phone saying, by the time it's all sorted out, he'll be gone and we can move forward. My judicial training kicked in through the fury. Document everything, stay calm, let the system work. But every parental instinct screamed for immediate, violent justice. Frank arrived 30 minutes later with Detective Chen and a CPS investigator named Maria Santos, whose expression suggested she'd already figured out what kind of case this was going to be. Mr. Rivera, Santos said, settling into my living room with the weary professionalism of someone who'd seen too many false allegations, we're required to investigate every report, but I've already reviewed the source of this complaint. Let's just say your neighbor has made herself known to multiple agencies in the past 72 hours. The investigation lasted 2 hours. Sophia handled it with remarkable grace, answering questions with the kind of clarity that comes from having nothing to hide. Detective Chen documented everything, her disgust with Bethany's tactics evident in every note she took. For what it's worth, Santos said as she prepared to leave, This is the most obviously fabricated complaint I've seen in 15 years. But I'm required to keep the case open for 30 days. That afternoon brought the final shoe drop. Derek Whitmore appeared at my door again. But this time he looked like a man who'd discovered his life was built on quicksand. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie crooked, and the smell of whiskey clung to him like cologne. "Mr. Rivera, I need to apologize," he stammered, his hands shaking as he spoke. "I found out what Bethany's been doing. The HOA money, the harassment, all of it. I had no idea." "Derek, you might want to get yourself a lawyer," I said, genuinely feeling sorry for the guy. "Your wife is facing federal charges, and depending on what assets are in your name, you could be looking at financial liability." His face crumpled. "She told me the mortgage was current, said her real estate business was thriving. I've been sending money home from every business trip, thinking we were building our future together." The beautiful thing about the truth is how it eventually surfaces, no matter how deep you try to bury it. Derek's world was collapsing in real time, and he was finally seeing his wife for what she really was, a criminal who'd been using him as an unwitting accomplice for years. "There's something else," Derek said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's planning something for tonight, something about making sure the problem goes away permanently. I think she might be planning to hurt you." The chess pieces were all in position. Bethany had escalated from harassment to evidence planting to false accusations, and now she was apparently considering violence. But thanks to Emma's conscience and Derek's belated awakening, we knew exactly what was coming. Time for the final act. Tuesday morning exploded into chaos at 6:47 a.m. The thunderous crack of my front door splintering off its hinges jolted me from sleep, followed immediately by the unmistakable sound of federal agents announcing themselves with the kind of authority that makes hardened criminals wet themselves. "FBI, search warrant." I threw on a robe and stumbled downstairs to find 8 agents in tactical gear systematically dismantling my living room. The lead agent, a woman whose badge identified her as Special Agent Torres, approached with an expression that screamed, "This is going to be a very bad day for someone." "Marcus Rivera, we have a warrant to search these premises for controlled substances, specifically cocaine and methamphetamine allegedly found in your vehicle." The beautiful irony hit me like a freight train. Bethany had called in her planted evidence, triggering the exact federal response she'd hoped would destroy me, except she had no idea she was about to watch her entire scheme unravel in spectacular fashion. "Agent Torres," I said, fighting to keep my judicial composure while watching strangers tear apart my home. "Before you continue this search, I think you should know I'm Municipal Court Judge Marcus Rivera, and I believe you're going to find that the evidence you're looking for was planted by someone who's been under federal surveillance for the past 72 hours. Torres paused mid-stride, her expression shifting from professional suspicion to something approaching amusement. "Judge Rivera, the same Judge Rivera who's been coordinating with Agent Harrison about a civil rights investigation in this neighborhood? That would be me." The search continued, but the atmosphere changed completely. Within an hour, agents had indeed found the planted drugs. Cocaine residue in a small baggie wedged behind my rear tire, exactly where our surveillance cameras had recorded Bethany placing it. But the real fireworks started when the second wave of federal agents arrived at Bethany's house with their own warrant. I watched from my front window as they led her out in handcuffs, her designer robe doing nothing to maintain her dignity, as neighbors emerged from their houses to witness her perp walk. The sound of Bethany's shrieking carried across the street like fingernails on a chalkboard. "This is harassment! That man is a criminal! He doesn't belong in this neighborhood!" Even in handcuffs, she couldn't help herself. Frank appeared at my elbow, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "DEA found 3 kilos of cocaine in her garage," he said, the satisfaction in his voice thick as honey. "Turns out our neighborhood queen has been running a side business to cover her mortgage payments." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Bethany's harassment campaign wasn't just about racism and property values. She'd been using her real estate connections to run drugs through suburban neighborhoods, targeting minority families who were less likely to report suspicious activity for fear of not being believed. "Gets better," Frank continued. "IRS seized her bank accounts this morning, $23,000 in missing HOA funds, plus another $60,000 in unreported drug income. They're calling it the largest suburban drug distribution ring the county's ever seen." By noon, local news trucks lined our street like an invasion force. The smell of diesel exhaust and ambition filled the air as reporters jockeyed for position to cover the story of the racist HOA queen who turned out to be a drug dealer. Sophia found me in the kitchen, scrolling through social media coverage of Bethany's arrest. "Dad, Emma's staying with her aunt in California. She's scared about testifying, but she wants to do the right thing." "She already did the right thing," I said, pulling my daughter close. "Her courage probably saved lives." That evening brought the most satisfying phone call of my judicial career. My civil rights attorney's voice practically vibrated with excitement. "Marcus, the federal prosecutor wants to offer Bethany a plea deal, 25 years for the drug charges, or take her chances at trial on civil rights violations, drug distribution, evidence tampering, filing false police reports, child endangerment, and conspiracy charges that could put her away for life." "What's she going to do?" "Her lawyer's trying to negotiate, but between Emma's testimony, Derek's cooperation, and 47 separate video recordings of criminal acts, she's looking at a conviction rate that would make a casino blush." Through my kitchen window, I could see Bethany's house sitting dark and empty, a for sale sign already appearing on the lawn. Derek had filed for divorce and was cooperating fully with federal investigators. The HOA had voted unanimously to remove all of Bethany's allies from leadership positions. Justice, it turned out, was a dish best served with a side of federal felony charges. The woman who'd spent months trying to destroy my family had managed to destroy herself instead, one documented crime at a time. And the best part? She still didn't know I was the judge who could have sentenced her if she'd committed her crimes in my jurisdiction. Some lessons, apparently, have to be learned the hard way. 3 weeks later, the Maplewood Estates Community Center had never seen anything like it. What was supposed to be a routine city council meeting about neighborhood safety had turned into the trial of the century, complete with standing room only, live streaming to 73,000 viewers, and enough media equipment to power a small city. I sat in the back row, still wearing my judicial robes from court earlier that day, watching the circus unfold. The irony was delicious. For the first time in months, I was attending a public meeting as Judge Rivera, not just Marcus the harassed neighbor. Bethany sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, her usual designer armor replaced by county jail couture. The woman who'd terrorized families for years now looked small and diminished, her Botoxed face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her court-appointed attorney kept whispering urgently in her ear, probably explaining for the 100th time how completely screwed she was. Mayor Patricia Williams called the meeting to order, her voice carrying over the excited murmur of 300 packed residents. "We're here tonight to address the systematic harassment and criminal activity that has plagued our community, and to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." Federal Prosecutor James Mitchell stood to present the government's case, his voice booming through the speaker system like the voice of justice itself. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is the largest suburban civil rights violation case our district has ever prosecuted. Bethany Whitmore didn't just harass her neighbors. She ran a criminal enterprise designed to terrorize minority families into abandoning their homes." The evidence presentation was devastating. Video after video of Bethany's harassment, audio recordings of her racist rants, financial documents showing the drug money, Emma's tearful but determined testimony via video link from California. By the time Mitchell finished, half the audience was crying and the other half looked ready to storm the defendant's table. But the moment everyone had been waiting for came when Mayor Williams called me to the podium. "Judge Rivera, would you like to address the community about your family's experience?" I stood slowly, savoring the moment I'd been anticipating for months. The walk to the podium felt like a victory lap as hundreds of eyes followed my movement. Behind me, I heard Bethany's sharp intake of breath as she finally realized exactly who she'd been targeting. "Thank you, Mayor Williams," I began, my voice carrying the authority of 8 years on the bench. 6 months ago, my daughter and I moved to Maplewood Estates looking for a fresh start. What we found instead was a criminal who thought she could terrorize us into abandoning our home. I turned to look directly at Bethany, whose face had gone completely white. "Mrs. Whitmore spent months trying to destroy my family because she assumed I was powerless to fight back. She called the police on me for parking in my own driveway. She filed false complaints with the city. She planted drugs in my car. She made false accusations of child abuse against me." The crowd's angry murmur was building to a roar, but I raised my hand for silence. But here's what Mrs. Whitmore never bothered to learn about her target. For the past 8 years, I've been the municipal court judge who sentences people exactly like her. I've seen this pattern of behavior hundreds of times, and I know exactly how it ends. The mic drop moment had arrived. "Mrs. Whitmore, You targeted the wrong family. You harassed the wrong neighbor. And now you're going to spend the next 25 years in federal prison thinking about what happens when you assume someone is powerless to fight back." The explosion of applause was deafening. 300 people rose to their feet, cheering and clapping with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for sports victories and wedding receptions. Camera flashes popped like fireworks as reporters captured the moment justice finally caught up with the neighborhood's most prolific criminal. Bethany sat frozen at the defendant's table, her world crashing down around her ears as she finally understood the magnitude of her miscalculation. She'd spent months building a federal case against herself, one documented crime at a time, under the nose of someone who specialized in putting people exactly like her behind bars. Justice, it turned out, had been living right across the street the entire time. 6 months later, I stood in the same community center, but this time the atmosphere was pure celebration. The smell of barbecue smoke drifted through open windows as the first annual Maplewood Estates Diversity Festival filled the park outside with laughter, music, and the kind of genuine community spirit that Bethany had tried so hard to destroy. Bethany herself was settling into year 1 of a 25-year federal sentence after taking the plea deal her lawyer practically begged her to accept. The alternative, facing trial on 47 separate federal charges, would have likely resulted in life imprisonment. Even in defeat, she'd managed to make one smart decision. "Dad, look at this," Sophia said, bouncing over with a tablet showing the GoFundMe page that had exploded across social media. The Maplewood Justice Fund just hit $127,000 in donations. People from all over the country are contributing. The fund had started as a simple idea: create scholarships for students pursuing civil rights law and establish a legal aid clinic for harassment victims. But it had grown into something beautiful, a lasting legacy that would help families fight back against people like Bethany for decades to come. Frank Castellano, now the democratically elected HOA president, approached with his characteristic grin. "Marcus, you've got to see the latest neighborhood statistics. Property values are up 18% since Bethany's arrest, and we've had 12 new families move in, the most diverse mix this community has ever seen." The irony was perfect. Bethany's racist campaign to protect property values had actually been suppressing them. Turns out families don't want to buy houses in neighborhoods where the HOA queen might plant drugs in their cars. Derek Whitmore had quietly moved to Arizona after the divorce, starting fresh with whatever assets the federal government hadn't seized. Emma was thriving in California, planning to study criminal justice in college. Last week, she'd sent Sophia a text that made us both cry, "Thank you for helping me find my courage." But the moment that made everything worthwhile came when Janet Morrison, our neighbor-turned-advocate, took the microphone at today's festival. "6 months ago, this community was infected by hate," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd of families picnicking in the late afternoon sunshine. "One woman tried to poison our neighborhood with fear, racism, and violence. But she made one crucial mistake. She picked a fight with someone who knew how to fight back." The applause started small but built into something that made my chest tight with pride, not for myself, but for what we'd all accomplished together. The Maplewood Justice Fund has already provided legal assistance to 17 families facing HOA harassment across the state, Janet continued. "We've helped pass 3 new anti-discrimination ordinances, and next month we're launching a legal clinic that will serve the entire county." Sophia squeezed my hand as the crowd cheered. My brilliant, resilient daughter had not only survived Bethany's attacks, but had emerged stronger, more confident, and deeply committed to helping other kids facing similar situations. "And," Janet said with a mischievous smile, "I'm happy to announce that Judge Rivera has agreed to serve as the legal advisor for our new community justice initiative, which will help other neighborhoods identify and stop harassment campaigns before they escalate." The taste of justice, I'd learned, was even sweeter when shared with an entire community. As the sun set over our transformed neighborhood, I watched children of every background playing together in the park where Bethany had once tried to enforce her twisted vision of suburban purity. Their laughter echoed off the houses like a promise that this community would never again tolerate the kind of hate she'd tried to spread. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something so much better than what your enemy tried to destroy, that their efforts become not just defeated, but completely irrelevant. The woman who'd called 911 when I parked in my own driveway was now serving federal time, and the judge she'd unknowingly targeted was helping ensure that no other family would have to endure what we'd survived. Justice served, community healed, and a legacy built that would protect families for generations to come. Now that's what I call a happy ending. Share your HOA nightmare story in the comments below, because every neighborhood has a Bethany, and it's time we all learned how to fight back. And don't forget to subscribe for more justice stories that'll restore your faith in karma. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the corrupt city contractor meets the building inspector who's been waiting 20 years for revenge.